For the last 7 years now, I've been building Above the Bridge. At this point, it's essentially something that I've worked on in some capacity almost every single day of my life since I was 16 years old. On August 2nd, we're throwing our first music festival, which by far feels like the biggest thing that we've ever done. It has 2 stages, 13 different acts, and it's at the biggest venue that we've ever booked. The following is my attempt to explain the events that have unfolded over the last 7 years as we approach what is probably the biggest week in Above the Bridge's history. So my name is Dante Pellegrino. I'm 23 years old. I'm originally from an East Bay Area suburb called Concord, California, and I founded Above the Bridge when I was 16 years old. I grew up in a pretty middle-class type household. Both my parents work in food. I have 2 brothers. I'm the oldest of 3. Music has kind of always been a thing in my life since I was pretty young. Neither of my parents are musicians, but my dad loves music, and he exposed me to a ton of different music growing up, a lot of like alt rock and like reggae and things like that. From a young age, I think my mom always realized that music was going to be a big thing in my life. I would always just kind of smack things and drum on stuff, and I ended up becoming a drummer, so that made a lot of sense. But when I was in middle school, I would get in trouble all the time for pen tapping. I was super into that weird shit that kids would do with their pen and their wrists, where they would just turn their wrists into a kick drum and turn the pencil tip into a hi-hat and just sort of make beats on the tables. I did that a lot as a kid, and I got in trouble a lot for it. I was always whistling and singing and making noise as a kid, and my mom kind of pushed me into learning an instrument, but I never really did until I got to the 8th grade. There was some kid in my high school who was giving away a drum set, and they just posted it on their Snapchat story, and we're kind of just yo, who wants this? And I remember sliding up, and I got the drum set, brought it home, I put it in my parents' garage. It was right as we were moving into a new house, and it sat in the garage, and I taught myself how to play the drums. Music was always a very big part of my life. It was something I was very, very drawn to from a super young age. About the same time as I did this, I didn't feel like I had very many passions in my life at this point outside of music and basketball. And I had just been cut from my high school basketball team, so I was kind of looking for a new outlet of sorts. At the same time, I was working at a movie theater as well. This is actually where Above the Bridge originally began. It was this movie theater. I was working there as a busser. My job was essentially to go into every theater and clean it after the movie was done. So I worked there for a solid year and a half. A lot of times I'd work very late into the night. I'd work from 5 p.m. to 2 a.m. And a lot of times when I did that, I was one of the only only couple bussers cleaning the theaters. So for most of the time I was alone, and I was kind of unsupervised. So I could always have my headphones in, and I could always listen to music while I was working. So this is a time period for me where I was exposed to almost more music than I ever was. I was very much in the midst of sort of the online music canon, as they say. And I was listening to a lot of what everybody else on the internet was listening to in 2018, 2019. A lot of SoundCloud rap and things of that nature. And then a lot of local punk bands I was listening to. At this time, I didn't really feel like I had a lot of direction in my life. Again, I had been cut from the basketball team at my high school. Bro wasn't going to the NBA, so I kind of was just a below average student without lots of meaningful interests, and I was just kind of floating. I felt like I was working in a movie theater and I was floating. Granted, I was young. It's not like that was a big problem because I was 16 years old, but I definitely feel at this time I was looking for something that brought me more meaning, brought me more of a purpose, that meant something to me. And I was working at this movie theater, and a friend of mine, she was running this Instagram account. Essentially, she would go on there and just write about records she was listening to, or do little think pieces or articles about whatever albums she was listening to at the time. And I was a very avid reader of these pieces that she was posting, and I thought it was just the coolest thing ever. I don't know, I think the whole music Instagram curator thing at that time was pretty new. I don't think I knew a lot of people in that world doing that. Now they're all over the place. You can't get rid of them. I asked her, I was can I copy what you're doing? And she was yeah. So I made an Instagram account called @AboveTheBridge_, and I started doing just that. Started writing about whatever record I was listening to while I was bussing these movie theaters. So, when I was in between theaters, I would listen to a few songs as I was bussing, and then I would write about those songs. And then when I'd finished the whole album, I'd post a review or a think piece or an article or whatever the album, evoked out of me. That was essentially the first concept for Above the Bridge. I definitely did this for a few months and really fell in love with it, and I started doing it pretty much every single day. I was really, really in love with the whole concept of discovery. It felt like a wormhole. I was very excited about all the music I was finding and discovering, and it definitely found like a new point of passion for me. So when I first started doing this, in the beginning, just writing about like whatever records I was listening to at the time, whether it was stuff that I'd grown up on, stuff that I found on the internet, stuff that I found on like random Reddit forums. I was very much in that like online music world as a kid. So when I first started doing this and writing all these Instagram pieces and stuff, I think part of the reason why I fell into it so heavily was I really loved like the discourse of it all. Like I really loved the conversational aspect of it all. And it felt like I was kind of growing this like online community in a really cool way. A lot of the pieces I was doing at the time, like they weren't getting very many likes or very many views or whatever, but they always had a lot of like comments. Like there was very consistent engagement and very consistent conversation around a lot of these things. And I think that was a big part of like what really attracted me to it. I felt like evoking a conversation was like what my goal was at the time, and I felt like I was doing a pretty good job of it. Because with that conversation came the first idea of like a community. Like the very first time that Above the Bridge felt like a community was, when I was writing these pieces online and people were commenting on them and the conversation was extending and people were making friends, and it was just one thing in a sea of vast things on the internet that were tying people together via their common interests. And to be able to curate something like that was really exciting to me, because I made a lot of like really cool friends on the internet in the early days of Above the Bridge, because they were just people who were reading my reviews, like my friend Ian Parrish or my friend Nick Altkin, or like a lot of different people that I just chatted with on the internet. That was where everything kind of began. This is kind of the form that Above the Bridge existed in from about 2018 to 2020. It was like this online Instagram only thing where me and my friends, like me and my friend Nolan and Abu and Ian, we were just kind of writing about like whatever records we were listening to at the time. We had a pretty decent sized like community of folks that were interested in the stuff we were writing about, and it sparked a lot of cool conversations, but that was pretty much it. It was very like in Instagram, and that was kind of the only thing that it was at the time. It was fun to start to bring in like other writers and stuff. Like that was a really cool aspect. It kind of made the community feel more vibrant when it wasn't just me writing about the records anymore. It was like a couple of my friends were doing the same thing, especially because like my friend Ian was originally just somebody who was reading the reviews. He found the reviews, was reading them, and then he became somebody who was writing the reviews on the actual Instagram page. So that kind of, level of community engagement, that level of like, oh, I really enjoy this, I buy into it, I want to be a part of the conversation. That was what really interested me about the early Instagram blog days. There was a cool moment where I think Above the Bridge became like a more important thing in my brain, and it was like right around the time of the pandemic. We did this thing called Request Week. I think it was like the first or second week of the pandemic. I think it was like something I was doing to just like keep myself busy. But me and my friend Nolan and my friend Abu, we did this thing called Request Week, where essentially like we posted on the Instagram, because a lot of the people who were following it were like independent artists themselves. So we posted on the Instagram like, we're doing like a request week, like send us your record, we'll listen to it, we'll write something about it, give you our thoughts on it, etc., etc., etc. So we did like 26 of these in like the span of a week. And I remember I was just in my room just writing. It was all I was doing, because it was the pandemic. There was nothing else to do. It was like searching for something to keep my mind off what was happening. And that was a pretty cool moment, because Above the Bridge became like escapist for me. Like it became escapism for me for really what was the first time. And it also was something that like I had put serious time into at that point. Like prior to that, it was just kind of like, fuck around, whatever. I'll write one draft of an article and that's it. Whatever, who cares? This first week of the pandemic, I really sat down and was like, okay, what's the coolest stuff that I can make, and how much of it can I make? So towards the very end of the pandemic, Above the Bridge was approaching its third year in existence, and I sort of realized like I wanted to make the next step. I'd kind of realized at this point I was 3 years into doing this, and it was, during the course of the pandemic, I did a lot of thinking, and it became something in my brain that was more than just a hobby. So I kind of decided I wanted to give this a real shot. So in my brain, what that meant was turn into a blog. But I was 19 years old and didn't know very much about the music industry or know very much about how to build anything like this. So my brain just went from like, oh, make it a business, I have to go from Instagram to the internet, which is very obviously a silly mindset to have. 2020 was very much post the blog era, but that's where my brain went. So it was like a very big deal to me to make sure that I launched like the blog portion of Above the Bridge and the new Above the Bridge website on the 3-year anniversary of the Instagram account. So I did that. I skipped a trip that a bunch of my friends were taking to Mount Shasta. It was like a boat trip. I skipped that just so I could launch this website on exactly the 3-year anniversary of Above the Bridge. And it's interesting. I think that was the first time where I like made a sacrifice for this. It was a very small sacrifice, obviously, but it was a sacrifice nonetheless. This was the Instagram post that I made the day that I launched the blog. And again, in hindsight, launching the blog in 2020 was not a good business move. It was not like an idea that was going to solidify what I was doing and bring it to any sort of next level. But in my brain, it was like, okay, this is real now. I'm like making something that's outside of the confines of this Instagram page, and it felt good. I think I launched the blog thing and then sort of immediately realized that, maybe there was a better way to do this, because we existed as a blog for 6 months, and I was realizing all right, this is cool and whatever, but how can I expand upon this? I'd been making videos in some capacity since I was a kid. I grew up learning how to use video editing software. It was a big part of my childhood, making Minecraft videos and making CSGO videos and Rocket League videos and whatever video game I was playing at the time. It was definitely a big part of my childhood. So I already knew a little bit about video editing and, the tiniest bit about filmmaking, whatever. On November 21st, 2020, I did my first artist interview. And that sort of changed everything. It again was just sort of this case of me throwing myself into something that I didn't really know how to do. I interviewed my friend Lance, and I put it on the website and put it on our YouTube channel, and that was just in my brain at the time, it was just another form of content that we were going to post on the website. And I didn't quite realize how much interviewing folks and starting to do things like that and starting to do video series around music, I didn't really realize that would become a very big direction of Above the Bridge for kind of years to come. But yeah, so I interviewed a few artists through that fall, through that winter, through that spring. And then that summer, I made my first trip ever to LA. Again, Above the Bridge at the time was starting to become a more serious thing in my brain. We had a blog, we had an interview series, etc., etc. It was a music media thing in my head at that point, and that was kind of all that it really was. But I was beginning to make the connection that if I wanted to find any actual success in the world of music media, the way to do it in a profitable and long-term manner was probably to make videos about stuff opposed to just writing about things. It was very much post the blog era. I was very behind on that. So that summer, June of 2021, I made my first trip to LA, and that was something that changed everything for me. I came to LA. I stayed with my friend Shane Farrell, who was 4 years older than me at the time, but he was 4 years older than me, and I stayed with him and his roommates, and they were all kind of in the electronic music space. Not a world that I was in. I just kind of did interviews on his couch in his living room. I interviewed his band. I interviewed a couple of the artists he was managing, his roommates. I interviewed a couple of his roommates' friends. I was just sort of talking to anybody that would talk to me, without much in the way of a reason why. I just was sort of doing it. But that was a cool trip because I think I learned a lot about Los Angeles, and I learned a lot about what I wanted to do, and also just interviewing people. And I think I learned pretty quickly that I was pretty naturally good at interviewing folks. It felt like a very informative trip because it kind of showed me that a lot of the future of Above the Bridge, and at least in the media world and how I saw it at that time, is in the video world and not so much in the writing world, not so much in the blog sphere, more so making actual video content about a lot of these artists, and that sort of became the North Star from that point on. That trip I did 7 interviews in a couple days, and it just taught me a lot about how impactful some of these stories can be. This trip, I feel sort of launched a very intense period of discovery for myself and for Above the Bridge. It was a period of time where I felt I did a lot of soul searching. I met a lot of people. I felt for the first time, what I was doing felt real because it wasn't just me in my bedroom anymore. It was me going out and interviewing folks and talking to people and actually becoming part of a music scene, which is obviously so core to what Above the Bridge is now. But I don't think I even really got out of my bedroom for the first 3 years. But I did that LA trip. I came back. I think I was on Music Matters episode 15 or something at this point. I really hit the ground running when I got back. The entire year of 2022 and I suppose the end of 2021 to the end of 2022 was a very, very informative time for me personally, and a very informative time for Above the Bridge. During this time, I'd gotten out of a long-term relationship. I dropped out of college. I was making a lot of new friends that weren't just kids from my high school. They were people who were in music around me, or I'd met in other ways. I was changing a lot as a person by proxy of all these stories I was hearing from some of these artists. They were really impacting me. I became really obsessed with this curiosity. It was a very curious period of my life, like where I just began chasing things. I didn't even know I was chasing, I was just looking. And that kind of really like sparked this philosophy that we kind of still maintain to this day, of just like intense curiosity and like radical empathy, where like I was just trying to talk to everybody that I could, hear their story. I didn't even really care if I liked their music or not. I just wanted to give them a platform to, one, tell their story to people, and then two, I wanted to hear their story because I wanted to learn from it. So I had this thing I would do that at the end of every single interview, I would ask the artist, I would be like, yo, can you give me a list of like your collaborators and like people you've worked with and like, you know, your producers and your manager and whatever, and can you give me their contact and can I ask to interview them? So I did that in the Bay Area, and that was how I was like meeting people at the time. My weekend was essentially like take my 2012 Prius and drive it to San Francisco or drive it to Oakland, interview an artist that I had met on Instagram, and then after that ask them who I should interview, and then that would be the person who I'd interview next weekend. I would ask them for a list, and then I'd find somebody from them to interview them next weekend. And I swear to God, like I met half of the artists in the Bay Area at that time that were independent and small and hungry. I guess just to illustrate how crazy things were moving at that time, I was watching a Hive Mind live stream one time. Hive Mind are like these like music YouTubers who like react to songs and shit. I was watching one of their live streams where they were reacting to submissions, and I was watching, and there was this one rap group that got submitted called Kid Lords, and I was watching the music video as the guys were watching on stream, and I realized that they were at a gas station, and you could see the gas prices in the background, and they were like $6, and I was like, they either have to be in LA or the Bay Area, and I was right. So I DM'd them, I met them, I asked them for a list after people to interview, and they introduced me to this group called Strife Gang, who became like a very fundamental group for like Above the Bridge's early days. And then like from them I met so many other people, and those two artists and another artist named Afterthought sort of like launched me into this like Bay Area hip hop scene where I was just meeting a ton of people at the same time. I mean, both in and outside of the rap world. Like I was meeting a bunch of people in bands, a lot of rappers, a lot of just all kinds of artists in the Bay Area, and they were sort of just all introducing me to each other. That Strife Gang interview was one that was incredibly emblematic of like what I wanted Above the Bridge to be, and it was a very informative one for the early days of this. I met up with these guys at like this old warehouse in like Hunters Point, which is like this like port area of San Francisco. Like it's like a port, like it's just like a bunch of like boats and like empty warehouses and things like that. I think that's where that was, but I met up with these guys, and they were just in like the parking lot of some empty warehouse, and I pulled up on them with my friend Mateo, and it was just the two of us, and there was like 10 of them, and they were like playing with like 3DSs, and like there was like Nintendo Switches, and just like dancing and hanging out like in this parking lot, and just like they were just posted hanging out, and we pulled up on them, and we were gonna do the interview in one of those warehouses. I guess one of their homies owned one, but I guess something had happened, so we had to go find another spot. So we originally had like looked for a spot in like somewhere in the Ferry Building. They also had a friend who owned something in the Ferry Building, but we had gone there and that didn't work out either. But so we had to walk like from around the Ferry Building to the Tenderloin, which is not a short walk, carrying like these 40-pound bags of equipment, like my cameras and like my interface and our mics and stuff. And we walked like a couple miles, like all the way to the Tenderloin to interview these guys in the back of this vintage shop called the Tilted Brim, because all of our other locations had fallen through. And it was very emblematic of just like where Above the Bridge was at that point. It was just curious, and we would just go and figure shit out. We didn't know these people. It was the first day we'd met them, but we were going all over town for them, looking for a place to have a conversation. And it just taught me a lot about being a human being and like what that meant, and like being adaptable, and like just the way in which some people are willing, and the extent that some people are willing to go to have their dreams be fully realized. And it was beautiful. It was a beautiful thing to kind of learn from. We ended up like doing the interview in the back of this vintage shop called the Tilted Brim in the Tenderloin. And I just heard like one of the craziest stories I've ever heard. And it was just from the 7 of these dudes, all from San Francisco, all from similar areas, and just like about their upbringing and like what they've done and the things they've seen and the adversity they've gone through. And just like they all had such individually crazy and inspiring stories. And to be able to like hear them all in the same place at the same time after that multiple multiple hours of walking around San Francisco trying to find a place to have this hour-long conversation. It was inspiring, and it was so strange because at the same time as doing all this, I would pack up my bags and I would drive back home and I would go to my job serving tables at the spaghetti factory in Concord. And it was just this really strange double life where I was hearing all these amazing stories and felt like I was really branching out and being truly curious for the first time in my life, and then just going back and serving spaghetti. It was a funny double life. At this time, I was talking to so many folks and meeting so many people and doing so many interviews with so many artists in the Bay Area that there was an actual community starting to form in real life. And it made me feel very similarly to the community that I had originally formed on the internet when I was working in that movie theater, 3 years prior at this point. It felt like this was the physical manifestation of that community that was once online and now it's in real life. And instead of people's Instagram accounts, it's now their faces, and we can hang out, and I'm going to their shows and then their video shoots, and I'm doing interviews with them, and we're shooting live sessions and whatever. It was the first time that I felt like I was a part of something musically. And it was incredibly exciting. That community, I felt like, really took form in the year of 2022. In large part because I was meeting so many of these people from interviewing them, and they were such hospitable individuals where I'd interview them and then we'd end up becoming close friends and kicking it all the time. And I think I learned a lot about that process as well, the whole interview to friend thing and the interview to community thing at this time. And it was really the first time that the whole ethos behind my idea of building this music community, not that it's my idea, originally, a million people have done it, but the whole idea of building this community in real life, it was the first time that really began to click in my brain. And it was just because I was, I would go from DMing somebody on Instagram, interviewing them, to being their friend, going to their show. And it was such a beautiful interaction. And the way that happened was so inspiring to me. And it brought so much extra value to my life. And it made me a better person. And I was very, very attracted to finding a way to bring that to more people. It was at this time that we decided to throw our first show. Throwing a show was something I wanted to do for a couple years at this point, but prior to this, I had no idea how to do it. And again, this is just another instance during this time period where I didn't know how to do something. I just threw myself into it and tried to figure it out. I never really had anybody teach me anything in this industry up to this point. I never really had any prior people in my life and in my family that were involved with music in any way. So I just figured it out on the fly. And this was kind of a thing that I wanted to do for a long time before I actually did it, because I thought throwing a show was incredibly complicated. But after doing it, I sort of realized it's really just a series of phone calls and emails. Not very difficult, at least not the kind of show that I was throwing. That's not a very difficult thing to do. Be the promoter and throw a local show. It's not rocket science. But that was a really cool moment because it felt like the first time that this community that we had built online that had eventually become a community in person, it felt like the first time that was going to be real in one building all at once together. And that was really exciting to me. So we promoted this show harder than almost anything that we'd ever done. I was making promo videos, I was making different posts, Edward made the poster. We were really, really trying to just make this the best thing that it could be. And we worked really hard on it. And we ended up selling over 200 tickets. Sound check went great. I had never done anything like that. I never experienced a sound check or a load in or a run of show or an advance or anything of that nature. I didn't know what being a promoter was. I was just kind of organizing shit and making sure everybody knew where they had to be, which I suppose is really the job of a promoter, but I didn't know what it was called at that point. I was experiencing all these things for the first time at this show, what it meant to run front of house, what different deal structures meant, what a versus deal was, what a ticket split was. These were all things that were foreign to me prior to the first couple of shows that I threw, but I was learning it on the fly. The load in for the first show went great. Sound check went great. The turnout was amazing. It was very full right off the bat. We get halfway through the first set and half of the power goes out in the city of San Francisco. And this moment felt so crushing to me. It felt like everything that I had dreamed about and everything that I'd wanted was right in front of me. And then in the blink of an eye, because of something entirely out of my control, it was just gone. And there was nothing I could do about it. I'll never forget the feeling of being in that Airbnb that I had rented in San Francisco that night. I'd got it in like a Airbnb for the team. There was probably like 7 of us at that point that were like actively working on Above the Bridge things at varying degrees, and this was like a very big moment for us. So I got us like an Airbnb, and I'll never forget the feeling of like being there and like just knowing that I was so close to all these things that I wanted. In my brain, at least at the time, I thought I was close. Obviously I wasn't, but in my brain that was a big step. And it was right there, and I saw it, and then it vanished right before my eyes. That's how I felt. We got super lucky because the drummer of the opening band, his name is Cam. He's a great friend of mine now. He ended up like allowing us like take the whole show, or just like half the show, I guess, a few of the acts, and move it to his backyard because he lived pretty close to where we were, Brick and Mortar in San Francisco. So that was fun. It like at least allowed, a little bit of solace that night and a tiny bit of music to be shared. But it was still a pretty difficult moment for me. I made this post that night, and this is what it read. I'm going to read it. Here's a story. Tonight we were set to host our first show ever at Brick and Mortar. We were lucky enough to host an incredibly talented group of artists in Vita, Lance Rediker, Morgan, Carago, and Have. By an unimaginable stroke of bad luck, half of the power in the city of San Francisco went out tonight. And as the lights in the city went down, so did our show. We were told that at Brick and Mortar, a power outage has not stopped a show for nearly 13 years. Needless to say, luck was not on our side tonight. Yet moments like tonight can serve as a point of reflection and a starting point for a conversation about perspective. In a potentially dangerous situation where streetlights went out, drivers were injured, and confusion ensued, no one at the show was hurt, and that's something to be thankful about. The kindness of Cam allowing us to throw a little house show still allowed for music to be shared tonight, even if it was on a lesser scale. Somehow, through the chaos of tonight's events, the mission that Above the Bridge is built upon gleamed brighter than it ever has. Despite adversity, in a strangely warped and altered way, the idea that music matters still held power tonight. Music brought people together, and that's something to be thankful for. For the rescheduled date, we marketed the show as like a war against PG&E. Like the whole thing was like, fuck PG&E, like we're coming back. And we did. And we sold 208 tickets. It was a fantastic show, but it served as a pretty big benchmark for me because it was one of the first moments where I think life and adversity and the things that keep people from being successful in their chosen creative field like punched me in the back of the throat. And I was really proud of the fact that we battled back and we did it again and we made it work. It taught me very early into my career of throwing shows that like throwing shows is just a cesspool of rolling with the punches. Shit will always go wrong. You will always make miscalculations. You will never be entirely correct about the room that you book or the artist that you book or the thing that happens or the things that you don't think that'll happen. It's just not going to go according to plan. The only thing that matters is that you learn how to roll with the punches and you learn that things will go wrong. It's just a matter of how you handle them. You have the choice of either laying down when new outcomes present themselves or figuring out the best steps forward when new challenges arise. And I think that level of just creative thinking and problem solving is the thing that will keep you from throwing no shows in your life and throwing the best shows that you can. Shortly after the show, I moved to LA. I felt like I needed to take the next step. So I did. I moved to LA in October of 2022 with a bunch of my best friends, musicians that I met in the Bay Area, members of the Above the Bridge team, people that I had known. And it was one of the most dynamic and changing periods of my life. That was October of 2022. Above the Bridge was about 4 years old at this time. About 4.5, I would say. That first week that Above the Bridge had moved to LA was really crazy. I remember like the difference in feeling in terms of like being in the Bay Area and, you know, every once in a blue moon you meet a musician in a non-musical space, and then being in LA and realizing that everybody is here and everything's at your fingertips and you're just constantly within it. It was a big change for me. Like, I had moved in with all musicians. I was around all musicians. I turned my garage into a studio. And it felt like the thing that I had wanted to be for so long was around me every single day, 24/7, 365. It was all right there. And that was really inspiring for me. And I think it definitely allowed me to think a lot bigger. And it allowed me to think that Above the Bridge could be something that I had previously never even considered. I knew I wanted it to be something big, but I didn't know what. I think it took moving to LA to allow me to kind of see what other folks were doing, see what was possible, have these inspirations right in front of me to actually realize what I wanted this thing to be. Keep in mind, at this point, I'm 20. I guess I'm 20 at this point, approaching 21. I still didn't really know what Above the Bridge was. I probably still don't really know what Above the Bridge is. I don't think I'll ever know. I think that's like one of the most important parts about running some sort of creative company or some sort of, being an artist or a creative person in general, is that like you need to accept that nothing will ever fit in a box. Nothing exciting ever fits in a box. Nothing exciting is ever one thing. It changes time and time and time again because you change. In a lot of ways, it's an extension of you. And as you change, so will the things that you want to say and the things that you want to accomplish. And I think always searching for the best version of whatever you're trying to build is really important. And being willing to like take those 5 steps backwards to just walk forward 1 step. You should always be reevaluating anything and everything. Never accept that things are going to be the same way that they always are. Things will always change, and if you don't accept that, you'll be left behind. You should always be pursuing the most efficient, the most interesting, and the most true version of whatever it is that you're trying to build. This was a big realization for me when I first moved to LA. I was like constantly changing and constantly trying to figure out like my place, my people. I moved here with a lot of folks. I met a lot of folks right off the bat, some of which I still talk to, some of which I don't talk to anymore. In the same way that like that last period of me being in the Bay Area was a massive period of growth. Moving to LA was another massive period of growth for me. And just like living in this house with my friends that were all in music and me being around music 24/7, 365. Like my life was my day job and then like music related things, whether it was an interview or I was going to like 4 shows a week. And I was just like throwing myself into everything that I could, going to so many shows, going to like so many different like music events and parties and whatever. I was just meeting everybody, and I was excited by it, and it felt like that same period of growth that I had experienced when I was interviewing so many folks in the Bay Area. And I think I try to remember those 2 periods of time as times where I was really growing and really expanding, and I always want to be in places like that. And whenever I think I get stagnant, I look back at those periods of times and try to see like how I could return to that, that period of growth. Opened up the garage studio, was like actively interviewing artists like as often as I possibly could, throwing as many shows as I possibly could. And those were sort of the 2 pockets that Above the Bridge was in at that point. We were interviewing artists and we were throwing shows, and we were doing like other like music related content at the time. In my brain, that's like what Above the Bridge was. It was like music media and music events, and those were the 2 pockets that I saw it in. And that was like a somewhat realized version of like what I think it is now, but it was very half baked. I didn't really understand like where I need to place my emphasis, how I was going to turn this into a real business, how I was going to make any kind of money off it. Those things were so far from my mind because I was just doing it at this point so much for the love of it, so much for the passion of it, and just trying to figure it out. Around this time, I'd been in LA for like I think a little bit less than a year, maybe a little bit over a year. And we threw a show that was very dear to us. It was the biggest show we'd ever done at that point. It was the Lodge Room in LA, and it was a show for our 5-year anniversary. At that show, we sold more tickets than we ever had. It was like 300 or 400 or something, and it was a pretty big moment for us because it was the biggest venue we'd booked up to that point. And it felt like there was like a heartbeat with Above the Bridge at that point that was really exciting. There was a pretty big like pulpit of folks around it that had like grown with it, and I'd met in LA, and it kind of felt like that community we had in the Bay was starting to recreate itself in Los Angeles, and that was really exciting to me. Around this time, I met a guy by the name of McLean Portis, who really went on to change my life in a lot of ways. He runs a company called Live 2, which is like kind of similar to Above the Bridge. They do very different things in very different pockets of music, but like the ethos is kind of similar. Live 2 is mainly a production company and a label and an artist development company. Not really pockets that Above the Bridge is in, but the ethos is very similar. And I met this guy named McLean Portis, and he was looking for somebody to help manage their YouTube channel, and he offered me a job. And that was a big moment for me because I quit my day job, started working for Live 2, and that changed my life in a million ways. I feel like it was the first time where I really had like somebody in my ear helping me through some of this stuff with the music industry, and it was the first time somebody had really extended that hand to me. I think prior to this point, like I was just really just throwing shit at the wall and seeing what stuck. which has always been like a theme of Above the Bridge. It's like I've never really had like a lot of mentors in this, or like people that I could, learn from. So McLean was one of the first people like that for me, and that did a lot for me. At this time, we started doing these things in my garage studio called Office Days, where like we would take a bunch of folks that worked with Above the Bridge and a bunch of folks that worked with Live 2, and they would all come into the garage at the same time, a couple times a week, and we would all just work on stuff. And this was really cool because it felt like a whole nother community that was beginning to form, and it was just sort of in my backyard, and that was really exciting. I did so many sick things with Live 2 during this period of time. We threw a show in 24 hours, which is something that was really, really cool. We threw a show on a boat. We did all kinds of crazy shit together, and I'm very, very thankful for that period of my life. That, is one of the coolest years I think I'll ever have, and a lot of those people still mean the world to me, and it was beautiful to meet all of them and be a part of that for so long. About a year and 3 months ago, Above the Bridge was in its, 6th year at this time. I began doing a lot of soul searching in terms of the company. Working at Live 2 taught me a lot about where I was, what I was building, what I was working towards, and I realized that I had this incredible heartbeat of a thing, all this culture around it, a lot of people who really loved it, loved what it stood for, but there was no actual business aspect of it, which was a hard realization to make, because that was never the intention behind this. I never really wanted this to be a business, but it just got to the point where I realized all right, I need to figure out how do I make this sustainable? How do I build this into a thing that can be around long after me? I need to find a way to make this not only my job, but be sustainable for a long period of time. And that was a big realization that I came to about a year and a half ago now. From that, there were a couple different things that I tried. There was a short period of time where we started developing some artists. We were working with an artist named Eli Holland, who I love dearly and is one of the most talented people I've ever met. But we were working with him for a little bit, helping build out visual rollouts for him, and that was a world that I felt very comfortable in. But I think I quickly learned that was not really the thing. I'm not super passionate about that, and it's not really a business model for a long time. It's kind of a thing that, if the songs don't go, neither does any sort of movement on the money side of things. So tried that for a little bit of time, and about a year ago now, I think it was September of 2024, I made this commitment to sort of really try to give the shows a real shot, really try to turn this into an events company and figure out what that looks like, what that means, how do I build that. And I think that it became clear that that I think was what I was looking for in terms of an actual business model in the short term. Now, don't get me wrong, it's not easy to make a bunch of money promoting shows. It's actually really hard. But I think I've tried to figure out some way to make that sustainable over the long period of time, and things I can build to in that world that, eventually will allow me to make Above the Bridge financially sustainable and actually continue to grow it for a long period of time. That was about a year ago. We've gone through a lot of ebbs and flows since that point, but I would say that is the current mission of Above the Bridge. We've really put all of our focus the last year into throwing the coolest shows possible. We've been growing out this visual brand with the comic book stuff, and that's been a very big part of everything that we've been doing. Obviously, Edward Toucan has taken the lead on a lot of that stuff. Been doing that, been building out different kinds of shows that we can throw. There's been lots of ebbs and flows of that over the last year, but I would say for a while now that's been the main focus. And that's why this festival that we're throwing is one of the most exciting things we've ever done. It feels for the first time, Above the Bridge has direction. It feels for the first time I understand what this can be, what I can turn this into, how we can build it, and it feels amazing to have that. For the longest time, I don't think I had any direction in this. Again, I didn't come from anybody musically. I didn't really know very many folks in the music industry before I kind of threw myself into this. And for a long time, I was sort of just throwing spaghetti at the wall, trying to see what would stick, what wouldn't. I just didn't know where to go. I think one really cool sign was sort of right after I made this commitment to just throwing shows the thing. We did 2 amazing sellouts in a row. We did a show with the Mexican Slum Rats. It was a charity show, their homecoming show. That was in December. And then after that, I think a few months later, in October, we did a sold-out show with the Peachtree Rascals. It was their album release. We did a cool little release show for them. This festival is the biggest thing that we've ever done. It is the most exciting thing that we've ever done. It is the first time where I feel like we've understood what Above the Bridge is supposed to be. I think it's the first time we've ever understood what Above the Bridge is going to be for the next 5 years, and we feel amazing about it. It's scary, it's anxiety-provoking, but I think more so than anything, we're running with a direction now, and that's incredibly exciting. For the last 7 years, I've been chasing whatever scared me, and doing this festival terrifies me more than almost anything ever has. In the same way that moving to LA did, in the same way that interviewing random artists in the Bay Area I had never met did, in the same way that throwing our first show did, in the same way that nearly every single successful thing in Above the Bridge's history has ever done. All it's done is scared me, all it's done is make me anxious, and that's exactly why we're doing it. August 2nd, Community Service Fest is at the Fox Theater in Pomona. Tickets are still on sale. We have 13 bands, 2 stages. Come be a part of the story. It's the biggest thing we've ever done. And that is a verbal history of the last 7 years of Above the Bridge and how we got to this point where we're throwing a festival. Thanks.